Hello. Thanks for joining me for the start of a brand new series of the Poltergeist Project. Series 4, the Edinburgh Poltergeist. The year is 1875, and the Scottish capital is full of strange stories from a building in Rose Street. Mysterious knocking, furniture moving, clothes thrown around, water flowing from an unknown source, and the screams of an unseen child. Oh yes, it's another weird and wonderful story for us to get our teeth into. Let's see how it stands up to some serious historical scrutiny. For those of you who are new to the podcast, let me introduce myself and a bit about what to expect. My name's Stephen Miller. I'm a historian with decades of experience in the heritage sector, scouring through the archives to tell stories of people, places, and now the paranormal. The Poltergeist Project is a combination of my historical skills and my lifelong interest in the weird and unexplainable. I'm a skeptic, but I would love to be proven wrong. If you're new here, then do go back and check out the first 3 series, Poltergeist stories from Keighley, London and Sunderland. I research, write, record and release these episodes as I go. I never know how a story will develop, where it will take me or how it might end. I also record the episodes in one take with no editing, so bear with me. This is so I can spend as much time as possible on the historical research. I know it won't be to everyone's taste, so sorry about that. I've been wanting to do a Scottish story since I started the project. It's a different historical challenge for me, and I also wanted to cover a slightly different time period. Edinburgh in 1875 fit perfectly. It's also a story with a fair few historical mysteries for me to get stuck into, not least that all the witnesses of the stories are unnamed in the press. And finally, it's a story which no one seems to have covered before. All I've been able to find so far are the contemporary press reports, which is surprising. Edinburgh is probably one of the best researched cities in the UK in terms of ghosts, poltergeist, hauntings. There's a whole industry around it. Haunted walks, ghost bus rides, underground ghost tours, dark history, the list goes on. But no one seems to have covered this story. So let's make a start with some background. Edinburgh in 1875 was a thriving and expanding Victorian capital city, but still modest in size. It had a population of just over 200,000 people. For comparison, London's population at the time was over 3 million. Glasgow, Manchester and Liverpool were all bigger than Edinburgh. Familiar landmarks today, such as the Scott Monument, Greyfriars Bobby and the National Gallery, were already visitor attractions. 1875 also saw the first Edinburgh football derby between Hearts and Hibs. Rose Street, the location for our haunting, was designed as part of James Craig's new town plan in 1767 and built the following decade. It runs parallel to and in between Princes and George Street, pretty close to Waverley Station, if anyone's ever got the train into Edinburgh. It was named after the national flower of England, not something I could really imagine happening today. It was largely a residential street, with cramped, multiple-dwelling tenement buildings. If you walk along the pedestrianised Rose Street today, it's hard to imagine, but during the 19th century, it housed some of the city's poorest residents and had a bad reputation for criminality. The incidents in this story occurred at number 153 Rose Street. It's fantastic to have such a specific address on the reports, but when trying to identify the location today, you do have to be pretty careful. It can be quite tricky. If you put 153 Rose Street into Google Maps, it puts you about 150 yards away from the actual location. This is due to renumbering. As streets developed, new buildings, demolition, especially post World War II in UK cities, occasionally streets got totally renumbered, which can really complicate things when you're trying to locate a historic property. You've got to use old maps. You can kind of go back in time and track any changes. In the UK, Ordnance Survey maps are a fantastic resource. And when you get to the larger scales, the 50-inch to a mile maps, you get some building numbering and naming. The smaller scale to 50-inch, you usually just get institutions named, and sometimes not even the name, sometimes just it'll say public house rather than the pub's name, for instance. But using this technique, I've been able to identify that 153 Rose Street is today a pub called the Kenilworth. In fact, I think I've actually drank in the Kenilworth. I went on a stag do many, many years ago in Edinburgh, and we did a crawl all the way down Rose Street, and I'm sure we'd have stopped at the Kenilworth. It was converted into a pub from residential tenements in the early 20th century. So this is the setting for our story. But what did witnesses say happened? I'm going to go through a quick list of some of the phenomena reported, just to give a flavour of the type of things we're going to be looking at in this series. In late 1874, early 1875, a woman named only Mrs. T in the press was living with her granddaughter. She was 86 and her granddaughter was 13. For 6 weeks, they experienced strange phenomena in their home, and here are a few of the incidents. On one occasion, Mrs. T was in bed one night and it collapsed. She then tried to sleep on the sofa, but her pillows kept being thrown from underneath her. Her granddaughter even tried to tie them down, but they wouldn't stay put. On another occasion, Mrs. T and her granddaughter were soaked by water coming from the ceiling with no apparent source. Clothes and chairs were frequently thrown around rooms. One time, a woolen cap being worn by Mrs. T was whipped off her head and thrown to the floor. She walked over, picked it up, put it back on. Straight away it happened again. A heavy rug was thrown across the room, and Mrs. T was repeatedly covered in her bed by a gown that she hung on the door. It was all too much, and in fear, Mrs. T asked a neighbour to stay the night with her. Mrs. H, the volunteer neighbour, was sceptical. She certainly didn't believe in things like ghosts. She reassured Mrs. T that it was all in her head and nothing to worry about. However, on waking, they found that their room had been totally trashed as they slept. Mrs. H also heard the sound of a child's scream. She said it sounded as though they were imprisoned in a press. Mrs. T confirmed that the screams were heard frequently and could last hours into the night. Another visitor was Mrs. B, a Christian missionary who worked in the poor areas of Rose Street and visited the home weekly. She witnessed a boot being tossed backwards and forwards before her eyes and firewood rising from a basket and being purposefully placed in front of Mrs. T. Other strange phenomena haunted Mrs. T in the house. When she would be eating something and leave it, it would then follow her around. This happened with some orange peel and some biscuits. It's all very weird. And to be honest, my sceptical mind is already being drawn to the granddaughter. The setup, a teenager living with her 86-year-old grandma, is slightly unusual. It suggests perhaps something traumatic or challenging has happened in her young life. To find out what, I'll need to identify them. So before the next episode, that's going to be the focus of my research. I need to find out who these two people were. If anyone has listened to Series 1 of the Poltergeist Project, the Keithley Poltergeist, they'll know I am quite good at finding people. I don't mean that to sound as sinister as it did. I want to find out who they were, how they ended up in this situation, and whether there's anything in their past which might offer an explanation for this story, paranormal or not. Certainly some interesting phenomena, lots of items moving, there's noises, there's screaming. We've got multiple witnesses, the Mrs. T, her granddaughter, the neighbour, Mrs. H, this missionary, Mrs. B. So we're already building up a cast of witnesses. The story of the haunted Rose Street tenement started getting around Edinburgh, and the current newspaper sent a reporter to investigate. He arrived at the property to find that Mrs. T and her granddaughter had already moved out. They were so scared and disturbed by the incidents. So he started to interview some of their neighbours. First, he spoke to two men who lived across the hall. He doesn't give their names. I found them to be men of intelligence, and it struck me not likely such as would be taken in. I told them I wanted to get their opinions in regard to this ghost story. The two men corroborated all the incidents that had been experienced by the witnesses so far. One of the men said, "When I heard of it, I thought it was some person who had made arrangements to frighten the old woman, and I said to her, 'I'll come and see that nothing takes place to annoy you.' Did you hear any sounds at all? I never heard anything till last Saturday night, when I heard something like the noise of a child squealing. I was standing with 3 other men on Saturday night in the street. when they heard the noise. I didn't hear it at the time, but I heard it about an hour and a half afterwards. And what was it like? Oh, it was by all the world like two children quarrelling, and one of them giving a squeal. The reporter then asked, "Don't you think that the whole of you could have been labouring under a mistake?" "I can assure you, sir, there is no mistake about it. There may be a mistake about many things, but there is certainly no mistake about this. The articles in the room were tossed about. There are downright respectable people who can testify to the facts." I mean, it's great to have more corroboration of the activity witnessed in the flat. I find the stuff about the screaming and hearing children quarrelling. I mean, in that close-knit community, how did they know it wasn't just actual children quarrelling? Or to see whether we get more insight in that as the story goes on. The men being interviewed also mention a minister visiting. The minister did not seem to say what it was. Only before he went, he gave away a prayer, and he offered up in his prayer as much as to say that some people had wished the old woman ill, and he hoped that their hearts might be softened and that they would look to a higher hand for pardon. It's an interesting comment that someone wished the woman well. Someone or something supernatural? The men themselves had mentioned something about wondering whether it was someone playing tricks on the old woman, so this seems to be becoming a bit of a theme. The men also say that the building had been used as an army barracks in its history, back in the early 19th century, and that other historic events of a suspicious character were known. Another thing for me to look into. Obviously, the building was already 100 years old by the time these incidents were taking place, so whether there's anything in the building's history as well will be interesting to find out. The reporter's then shown to Mrs. T's door. He knocks, despite being told that they'd left, and is very surprised to get a reply. It's Mrs. H, the woman who'd spent the night with Mrs. T when she was scared. I'm going to do some quotes on Mrs. H. Now, these quotes in the original reports are written in a kind of Scots dialect. There's a very noticeable accent in the way they are written. At risk of being cancelled, I think I'll just do them in my accent. My great-granddad was Scottish, but I don't think that gives me the right to butcher the accent. Mrs. H corroborates the stories and adds, "I can tell you, within the last 2 or 3 minutes I've heard a noise. On Tuesday last I heard a noise in the house. It was like as if there was a quarrel. It was like as if there was an awful knock-knocking in the house." The reporter asks if she really believes all this could be the work of a ghost. "There's no doubt about it. I saw the furniture turned upside down myself. One day, I took in my stocking with me, and a boot came flying over our heads, while a brass nail came down on the floor. 6 times, I can tell you, the old woman's gown came over the bed. I took it back each time, and I saw its movements with my own eyes." How long is it since you heard the ghost, and in what form did it make itself known to you? "Oh, sir, I heard it calling in a sort of sharp voice. 'Hey, hey, hey!' The old woman who stayed in the house has left, but I can assure you I still hear the noise. It's the most peculiar thing. I wonder if it's magic. I was lying in bed just before you rapped at the door, and I'd heard it several times. It's something quite extraordinary." The newspaper article caused quite a stir. The report was picked up around the world, but some of the rival Edinburgh newspapers mocked the Current and for sending a reporter in the first place and the whole story quite mercilessly. But what we don't have are the thoughts of the woman and the child at the centre of the story. Unfortunately, they'd left when the reporter visited. Thankfully, this reporter seems to have been a pretty diligent chap. He came back a week later to follow up on the story. He was determined to speak to Mrs. T, and he did manage to track her down. In the next episode of the Edinburgh Poltergeist, we'll hear from Mrs. T herself. She has a theory for what was causing all this activity, and it is absolutely not what I expected. She blames everything on the Wizard of the North. Now, I've heard deceased relatives, electrical energies, restless spirits, but never a wizard before. Sounds like something straight out of Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. It is interesting given Mrs. H's comments about it being magical, the 2 guys that were interviewed and this minister all talking about someone playing tricks on Mrs. T. Yeah. So something tells me this story's only going to get stranger and stranger. Hopefully, in the next episode, I'll be able to reveal the identity of Mrs. T for the first time in 150 years, and I really need to find out who the Wizard of the North was. So you'll have to join me next time for episode 2 of the Edinburgh Poltergeist. Before then, do check out the Poltergeist Project Facebook page. I'll post more content up there, some maps and images. I've also found a really cool video from the 1950s of Rose Street, which I suppose is getting halfway back to, the period of our story. So it gives a better idea than visiting Rose Street today, what it might have been like at the time. But for now, that'll be goodbye. Thanks very much.